My grandfather was a quiet man, the kind who didn't say much unless it mattered. He built things with his hands, tractors, engines, fences, and taught me that the truth always leaves fingerprints, even when the words disappear. He died 10 years ago, and for the last 9, I've tried to forget the way his hands shook in the end. He kept saying strange things, too, about a visitor from the lights and a book that was never written. We thought it was dementia. It wasn't. Last month, I met someone, or something, a being that walked like a man but wasn't one, a being that stood in the shadows of my grandfather's barn, waiting for me after 2 decades of silence. He spoke only once, but he said my grandfather's name. Not the one on his grave, not the name his war buddies called him. No, he used the name only my grandfather's mother used, one I'd only seen scribbled in an old Bible margin, written in faded pencil from 1911, Ezra Ellie Morrison. That was the moment the world cracked open. I didn't go to the barn to find anything. I was just back in Iowa to handle the estate, sell off the land, sweep the dust. The place was falling in on itself, peeling walls, a roof like a rusted jawbone. It smelled like memory. The first night, I stayed in the old upstairs room, the same one I slept in as a kid, with the cracked window and the crucifix hanging above the bed. It used to comfort me. Now it just stared. It was 3:12 a.m. when the lights flickered. Not just the bedroom lamp, everything. The stars through the window blinked. The hum of the earth stuttered. And from the south end of the property, where the barn slouched like a tired sentinel, I saw it. Light. Pulsing, like breath. I grabbed the shotgun my grandfather always kept behind the kitchen door, not because I thought I'd need it, but because it was habit, a ritual. Something about holding that old worn stock made me feel like I still understood the world. I walked out into the cold. The barn creaked before I reached it, a long, groaning sigh, like the building itself was exhaling. And then I saw the shape. Human, but not. It stood taller than any man I'd known, slender, draped in something that shimmered, not cloth, not metal, just presence. It wasn't moving, just standing at the workbench where my grandfather used to fix broken parts. And then it turned. Those eyes, not hostile, not vacant, but impossibly deep, like looking into a well that had no bottom, only reflection. And then the voice. Not from its mouth, from somewhere inside my skull, vibrating like memory wrapped in thunder. Ezra Ellie Morrison. I didn't speak, couldn't. He remembered, the being continued. He was one of the few. He saw the moment, the truth behind the silence. What truth? I finally managed to whisper. The being took one step forward. The boards didn't creak beneath it. The silence of the one your world calls Christ. The reason he left no writings. The reason he only ever spoke. I dropped the shotgun. And that's when the real story began. The shotgun clattered to the barn floor, but the being didn't flinch. It just stood there, calm, like it had been waiting not hours, but decades, maybe longer. I took a shaky breath. What do you mean, the reason Jesus never wrote anything? It moved closer. The air around it shimmered faintly, like heat over asphalt. And then that voice again, inside my head, but so clear it felt carved into the bones of my skull. Because writing limits truth. What? Language decays, paper burns, stone erodes, even your scriptures. Translated, edited, fragmented, each version a copy of a copy. But spoken truth, truth spoken in divine resonance, enters the human field directly. It's stored in the soul. I swallowed hard. You're saying Jesus didn't write because he didn't need to? He wrote, the being corrected, but not with ink. He wrote into people. The lights in the barn dimmed for a moment, or maybe my vision blurred. I don't know, but I felt something shift inside me, like a door creaking open that had been welded shut for generations. Your grandfather, the being said, was one of those people. My knees almost buckled. I leaned against a support beam, trying to process the words. My grandfather, a quiet, lonely man who rarely talked about faith, was somehow connected to Jesus, not just as a believer, but as a receiver? Wait, I said, trying to slow my pulse. You're saying Jesus left messages, encoded in people? Encoded through frequency, it replied, through vibrational imprint. Every word he spoke resonated beyond sound. It altered energy. The people who heard him, truly heard him, became carriers of a field that could not be written, only lived. My mind raced. But if it's not written, if it's not recorded, how do we know it's real? The being tilted its head, not judgmentally, almost patiently, like it was used to this question. Because you feel it, it said. The parts of his teaching that still burn in your chest, that make your breath catch or your eyes sting, those are echoes, not memories, echoes of a frequency your soul already knows. I was silent, and then I remembered something. My grandfather used to hum. Not a song, not a tune, just a low, vibrating hum he'd repeat while working. I used to think it was just absent-minded noise, but now... You said he remembered, I whispered. Yes, the being said. He remembered part of the code. That's why we came to him, to preserve it, and now to pass it to you. I stepped back. Me? No, I'm nobody. I don't even go to church anymore. I don't even know what I believe. Exactly, the being said. You are empty enough to be filled. Something inside me cracked. And in that crack, I heard something else. Not from the being, not from my mind, but from the old rafters of the barn. Faint, like a memory calling through time. A hum. The same one my grandfather used to sing. Only this time, I knew it wasn't just sound. It was scripture, not of words, of vibration, a gospel too pure for pages. And the alien, this impossible messenger, looked at me and said, "You're ready to remember." It was like a wave passed through me. Not heat, not light, just frequency. That's the only word I can use. Like every cell in my body had been lightly plucked like a string. And somewhere deep in that resonance, I could feel it. My grandfather's hum, his code, something ancient trying to speak through me. But I didn't understand it. Not yet. The being stepped away from the workbench, still watching me, not with suspicion or threat, but with a gaze so steady it felt like time had stopped around it. Ready to remember what? I asked. The reason your kind was made. I blinked. You mean humanity? No, I mean you. The barn groaned again. A sudden wind rustled through the cracks in the wooden slats. The being moved toward a crate covered in a tarp and pulled it back. Beneath it wasn't tools or supplies. It was a black metallic cube, smooth, featureless, about the size of a cinder block. When the being placed its hand over it, the surface shimmered and symbols lit up, glowing gold, moving in circular patterns, like language built from orbit instead of alphabet. What is that? I asked. A resonance translator. It projects frequencies stored in organic memory fields. English, please? The being looked at me, then clarified. It plays back what souls remember, but minds forget. That's when the cube lit up completely. A beam projected into the air above it, and then a voice. My grandfather's voice, but not the one I remembered from the hospital bed. No coughing, no weakness. Strong, calm, precise, like a man in full. Ezra Eli Morrison, August 4th, 1989, the voice said. I saw him, not in dream, not in story, in light. I staggered back. It was him, Somehow, impossibly, the cube was replaying a recording, not just of sound, but of essence. The voice had warmth, weight. I saw the one they called Jesus, the recording continued, but not as a man, as something else, something more. He wasn't teaching, he was activating. I turned to the being. What does this mean? It means your grandfather was one of the last to see the uncorrupted signal. And now, you're next. I shook my head. No, I'm just a man. I fix motorcycles, I drink too much. I haven't prayed in years. That is precisely why you can carry it. The signal needs those without expectation. The cube's projections shifted. It showed an image now, faint but real. A man standing in desert robes, surrounded by golden light. He wasn't preaching. He wasn't speaking. He was listening. And around him, 12 others. Not writing, not memorizing, just feeling, absorbing something with their whole bodies. Why didn't Jesus write it down? I asked, softly. The being answered without hesitation. Because the truth couldn't survive ink. It had to be inscribed on something eternal. And in that moment, I realized what he meant. The human soul, our DNA, our consciousness, our collective memory. Jesus didn't write a book, he became the book, and every person who truly encountered him became a page. The image above the cube began to shift, slowly at first, like smoke taking form. The man in desert robes turned, not to speak, not to teach, but to look directly into the projection, into us. My legs went weak. It wasn't just a hologram, it knew it was being seen. His eyes weren't brown or blue or green. They weren't even eyes in the way we understand them. They were depth, colorless and full, like looking into the birth of stars. And for one terrifying, beautiful second, I knew he saw me, the real me. All my failures, my rage, my emptiness, my guilt. And he didn't flinch. The alien stepped beside the cube. Its voice returned, softer now, less like command, more like a whisper woven into breath. This was the last imprint, the final encoding before the transmission was buried. Buried? I asked. By who? The being turned its head, not by men, by time, by interference. What kind of interference? The cube flickered again. This time, the image shifted from the desert to a darker place, columns of stone, flickering torches, a council of men debating, arguing. Power, the being said. It bends light, it warps sound, and it does something worse to truth. It formats it. I felt cold. You're saying they twisted it? Not maliciously, not at first. But the signal that Jesus encoded was not safe for control systems. It was disruptive, liberating. So, over centuries, your species mistranslated what could not be written, and the real teaching went dormant. My voice cracked. So, all this time, people praying, believing, worshiping, it's been for nothing? No, the being said, not nothing. It kept the memory alive. But memory without resonance is like reading about fire and never feeling warmth. The image returned to the desert. Now Jesus was standing alone, and around him the air pulsed, the sand shimmered, a circle of light spread from his feet. This, the being said, is the encoding. It looked like nothing, just a man, standing, silent. But then I felt it. A pressure behind my sternum, a heat that wasn't heat, a vibration so low it didn't have sound, but it moved me, physically. I staggered back. Jesus did that? I gasped. He still does, the alien said, to those who can receive. The frequency was never shut down, only silenced by the noise of your world. I couldn't speak. All I could think of was my grandfather, his quiet afternoons in the barn, humming the same 3-note pattern for hours. Not music, not melody, just signal. He'd been carrying it all this time, and now I was carrying it too. The image vanished. Not with a flicker, not with a fade. It collapsed, like a sandcastle pulled inward by invisible hands. The cube went dark. The barn fell silent. The being turned toward me and asked simply, "Would you like to hear the part of Jesus' message that was removed, deliberately?" My mouth opened, but no words came. Every instinct screamed yes. Every fear whispered no. "What do you mean, removed?" I asked. "From the Bible?" "From everything," it said. "Scripture, liturgy, doctrine, culture, even your collective memory." "Why?" The being stepped forward, voice steady. "Because it gave you power, and power, when awakened without hierarchy, cannot be controlled." I swallowed. What did he say? The alien turned back to the cube. He said that salvation is not a rescue, it's a remembering. The words hit like thunder in my ribs. Not a rescue, not a deal, a remembering. "That doesn't sound dangerous," I said, half laughing to mask the tremble. "It is the most dangerous thing you could know," the being replied, "because it makes every human divine, not in metaphor, in function." The cube lit up again, dim this time, just enough to cast a soft glow. "The early followers understood," it continued, "before the councils, before the creeds. Jesus didn't tell them what to believe. He showed them what they already were." The projection flared. This time, not Jesus, but someone else, a woman. She was standing in a stone courtyard, surrounded by others, listening, glowing faintly. I'd never seen her face before, but something about her radiated truth. "Who is that?" I asked. "Mary of Magdala, the last to carry the full message." The being moved its hand, and suddenly words filled the air, not heard, but felt, like they were vibrating out of the floorboards. They weren't English, or Hebrew, or Greek, but I understood them. "You are not broken seeking repair. You are whole, seeking awakening. And what you call salvation is just your memory of who you've always been." I fell to my knees. It wasn't just beautiful, it was true, not intellectually, biologically. My cells knew it before my brain caught up. And then the being said something I'll never forget. "This is the part they couldn't let survive, because if enough of you remembered, the world's power structures would dissolve overnight." I couldn't speak. Not because I didn't want to, because I finally understood. Why Jesus never wrote anything. Why the church feared silence. Why my grandfather hummed the same 3 tones every day of his life. Because the real gospel wasn't in books. It was in us. The barn groaned again as the wind pushed against its brittle skeleton. Dust swirled in the air like memory coming undone. I stared at the cube, at the image of Mary, at the echo of words that weren't words. I felt like I was standing inside a gospel that had never been written, only lived, then buried in the silence between generations. The being turned slowly, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. "He left you a key," it said. I blinked. "My grandfather?" "Yes, buried beneath the foundation, a place the world cannot touch, a room built not with wood or stone, but with intention." It walked toward the back of the barn, toward a section I remembered vaguely from childhood, where Grandpa kept old fencing wire, half-broken tools, rusted farm gear. The shadows deepened there. Even as a kid, I avoided it. The being reached down and pressed 2 fingers against a knot in the wooden floor. The boards responded, not with sound, but with resonance. A soft hum rose from the earth. Then, a crack. The floor split open along invisible seams, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. "Are you coming?" the being asked. My mouth was dry, my hands shook, but I followed. The steps led into what felt less like a cellar and more like a crypt. No mold, no cobwebs, just stone. Smooth, cool, ancient, not farm construction, nothing like the house above. And yet, my grandfather had built it. Or had it built through him. At the base of the stairs, we entered a round chamber. The walls were etched with symbols I couldn't decipher, but my bones responded to them, like they were older than language. At the center of the room stood a pedestal. Upon it, a second cube. Smaller than the first, dustless, waiting. The being gestured to it. This is the original frequency carrier, what your grandfather preserved when he remembered. I reached toward it, hand trembling. Before you touch it, the being said, you must decide. Once the signal is activated, you can't unhear it. You can't forget. It will awaken something in you that cannot go back to sleep. I paused. What does it do? It lets you listen. To what? The being didn't answer. I placed my hand on the cube. No sound came. Not at first. Then, a heartbeat. Not mine. Not human. And then, a voice. Gentle, male, familiar and foreign all at once. If the kingdom were in the sky, the birds would be closer than you. If it were in the sea, the fish would already know. But I tell you, the kingdom is inside you, and it is outside you. When you know yourselves, you will be known, and you will realize you are the children of the living source. Tears burned down my cheeks. I hadn't heard those words before, not in church, not in sermons, but I knew them. Every part of me did. Because they'd been there all along, like static just out of range. And now, the signal was clear. The voice echoed into stillness. I pulled my hand back, gasping like I'd just surfaced from a deep, ancient ocean. The being watched me, not with satisfaction or pity, but with something deeper, recognition. I whispered, "That wasn't a recording." "Correct," it said. "It's a vibrational residue, a living imprint. You didn't hear it, you recalled it." My legs nearly gave out. I staggered to the side of the chamber, bracing myself against the wall etched in symbols I still couldn't read, but now felt somehow responsible for. "This is what he meant," I murmured, "when he said the kingdom is within?" "Yes," the being replied, "but it went further, much further." I looked up. The being placed its palm on the second cube again. Symbols glowed, not golden, but deep violet. The chamber darkened. The air pressed inward, like the universe was listening. And then the image appeared. It wasn't like before, no hologram, no floating face. It was memory turned to vision. A dusty hill, a crowd, but no preaching. Jesus stood alone, drawing something into the dirt with his finger. Around him, silence, expectation. And then, he looked up. He wasn't handsome, not in the way paintings made him. He was real, weathered, focused, filled with something I now understood was frequency, not just charisma, not wisdom, raw, encoded light. And then he spoke, not to the crowd, to me. "If you follow me because you think I will save you, you do not know me. If you believe I walk ahead so you can stay behind, you are still blind. I walk to show you how to walk. I love so you can remember how. And when I leave, I do not go far, because what I am, you are becoming." I collapsed. I didn't fall. I collapsed. Because every prayer I had ever whispered, all the nights I asked for rescue, for forgiveness, for meaning, it was answered right there. Not with a yes, not with a no, but with, "You already have it." I was sobbing, not because I was sad, but because I finally saw the truth. Jesus didn't come to build a religion. He came to remind us what was stolen, not by devils, but by time, by fear, by men who couldn't bear to see others empowered. The image faded, and the being said, "That was the teaching they buried, because it made every human a temple, and temples are harder to control than churches." The chamber grew still. Not silent, still. Like the air had remembered how to pause. The kind of stillness you only feel during snowstorms or funerals. A sacred hush. I wiped the tears from my face, staring at the now dark cube. My heart was thundering with something I didn't have language for. Not awe, not fear. Initiation. The being stepped closer. I saw, for the first time, how tired it looked. Not physically, energetically, as if carrying this truth through time had cost it something precious. "Now you know why he never wrote," it said softly, "and why his silence was the loudest message." I nodded, barely able to speak. But why did he have to die? If he had this power, if he was awakening people, why not just finish the work? The being's eyes darkened, not with anger, but with gravity. Because his death was not the end, it was the beginning of the transmission. The words hung in the chamber like incense. You think the crucifixion was the climax. It wasn't. It was the detonation. "What do you mean?" I asked. The being stepped back to the wall, its long fingers tracing one of the carved symbols. A low hum began to rise again. Not mechanical, not digital, organic, alive. "When he died," it said, "he released a frequency, a field your people call the Holy Spirit. But that is a mistranslation. It was not a ghost. It was a gateway." A gateway to what? The wall shimmered. And then I saw it. A ripple in the stone, like water bending around memory. And through it, just for a second, I saw stars, galaxies, light flowing like rivers, but also faces. Human, not human, familiar and strange, watching, listening. "To the dimension he opened," the being said, "not up, not out, but in. The kingdom, the Father's house, the many mansions. He was describing this. The layered realms of consciousness hidden within you." I shook my head. "That's not what they teach." "Because it was buried," the being said, "not by violence, by theology." I felt the weight of 2,000 years press against my chest. "He died to open a door," I whispered. "He died to become the door," it corrected, "and every soul who entered it carried the signal forward, until time found you." I couldn't speak. The being stepped aside, revealing a second passage, narrow, dark. "What's down there?" The being answered, "The record of the others who remembered. And the moment you'll have to decide, will you carry the signal, or will you forget?" The passage yawned before me, narrow, ancient, humming. I didn't want to walk down it, not because I was afraid of the dark, but because I knew that once I saw what was stored down there, I could never pretend not to know. The being gestured silently. No pressure, no command, just invitation. I stepped forward. The corridor wound downwards, no lights, just that pulse, subtle but constant, like the heartbeat of something older than time, echoing inside the bones of the earth. After several minutes, the walls widened. We entered a chamber that glowed without source, soft violet light radiating from smooth stone. Along the walls were 12 alcoves, in each a stone seat, and above each seat a shimmering oval of energy. Suspended in those ovals were images, not statues, moments, frozen in time like memories caught in amber. The being raised a hand. "These are the others," it said, "the ones who carried the original resonance, the ones who remembered after him." I approached the first alcove. Inside the oval, I saw a woman kneeling beside a well, dust in her hair, tears on her cheeks. A man stood behind her, hand outstretched. But this wasn't Jesus. It was Thomas. Doubting Thomas, I muttered. Another mistranslation, the being said. He didn't doubt Jesus. He refused to repeat what he hadn't experienced for himself. That made him dangerous. The image flickered. Thomas touched the woman's shoulder. Light passed from his hand to her chest. Not magic, not miracle, just memory. He transmitted the signal, just like Jesus, I whispered. The being nodded. And they silenced him. Not with death, with doctrine. I moved to the next alcove. A monk, alone in a cave, chanting words I didn't understand, but my heart did. He was creating the same hum I'd heard from my grandfather, but quieter, secretive, hidden. He wasn't allowed to speak it publicly, I guessed. Correct, the being said. He encoded it into sound, into rhythm. The Gregorian chants you hear today, they're fragments of what he preserved. I moved on. A woman burned at the stake, a man drowned in a river, a child silenced by frightened priests. Why are they all alone? I asked. Because the ones who carried the full signal never fit in. They couldn't. The frequency made them unbearable to systems built on fear. I felt my throat tighten. They were prophets. They were mirrors, the being corrected. And humanity hates mirrors when it forgets what it looks like. I stood in the center of the vault, heart pounding. So that's it? They all died, silenced? No, the being said. They planted seeds, in blood, in breath, in whispers between generations. And then it turned to me. Your grandfather was the 12th. I froze. What? He was the last known carrier. Until now. The chamber pulsed. You are the 13th. The words hung in the air like a sentence I didn't know how to carry. You are the 13th. Not chosen, not special, selected by frequency. I stood motionless, the vault humming around me like a living organism. Each alcove, each story of those who remembered seemed to lean in now, not to witness me, but to complete me. I turned to the being. What does that mean? What happens now? Its voice softened. We complete the transfer. My stomach twisted. Transfer of what? The resonance your grandfather preserved. The one Jesus awakened. The one every carrier before you held in silence. And then what? I just go home, live a normal life with this? The being didn't answer immediately. It walked to the center of the chamber, where a circular platform pulsed with blue light, and stood inside. Come, it said, and listen. I stepped onto the platform. The moment my feet touched the center, something unlocked inside me. Not with a sound, but with permission, as if the universe had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. The walls darkened. A tone began to rise, not heard, but felt. It vibrated in my ribs, then my spine, then my skull. The kind of sound that stripped language from your mind and left only knowing. Then the being spoke. But not in English, not in words, in resonance. A sequence of tones, pulses, and images hit me all at once. Faces, symbols, memories not my own. Fields of light, vast as galaxies. And in the middle of it all, a voice I'd heard once before in the barn. Jesus. This body is temporary. This pain is temporary. This name is temporary. But what you carry has no beginning and no end. You are not here to worship me. You are here to remember what I remembered. I fell to my knees, tears streaming. The being extended a hand, placing 2 fingers to my forehead. And in that instant, I saw everything. My grandfather, humming alone in the dark, tuning the barn like an instrument. My childhood self, standing in the hayloft, feeling something holy but not understanding it. The crucifix on my bedroom wall, not as a symbol of death, but as a map of vibration. vertical, horizontal, intersecting at the heart. I saw the crucifixion, not as execution, but as transmission. I saw Mary, Thomas, the others, all still alive in the field of memory. And then I saw me. Not as a man, but as a carrier. The light faded. The platform dimmed. The being stepped back. "It is done," it said. I was still on my knees, breath shaky, eyes open. "What happens now?" I whispered. The being looked into me. "Now you decide what to do with what you remember." I climbed the stairs in silence. The air changed as I ascended, heavier, more aware, as if even the atoms remembered something they'd been waiting to feel again. When I emerged back into the barn, the sun had shifted, but the world outside the wooden slats felt distant, less real than the chamber I'd just left. The being remained below, in the vault of memory. It said nothing more. It didn't need to. It had handed me the signal. Now it was mine to carry. I walked back into the house on legs that didn't quite belong to me. Every floorboard groaned like a choir. Every shadow held stories. On instinct, I went to the bookshelf. My grandfather's old Bible was still there, leather-worn, sun-faded, held together by faith and duct tape, the kind you only open when you're desperate. I used to flip through it as a kid, bored during visits. I knew every margin note, every underline. Every page was burned into my memory. But when I opened it now, something was different. Right after the Gospel of John, where there should have been a blank page before Acts, there was another chapter. Untitled, handwritten, in my grandfather's voice. My heart nearly stopped. It read, "To the one who comes after me, if you are reading this, then the vault has opened. You've seen what I saw, heard what I could never say, and now you carry it. This gospel is not new. It is older than Scripture. It is the voice behind the thunder, the breath behind the word I am. Preach it if you must, but first live it. Make your memory holy again." I dropped into the chair, trembling. It was his handwriting, but I'd never seen this page before, and I'd studied this book 100 times. It wasn't there. Until now. As if it had been waiting for the signal to unlock it. As if paper, like people, could hold forgotten truth. And then I realized he'd never meant to pass this through words. He meant to pass it through frequency, through hums, through looks, through me. A sound outside. I looked up. A car on the gravel road. Just a traveler, slowing near the fence. But for a moment, the engine's idle had a pitch, a tone, that matched the one from the vault. And I understood. The world had always been humming this signal. I had just never heard it. Until now. The traveler didn't stop. Just coasted past the old fence line, windows up, sunglasses on. But as the car disappeared down the gravel road, a chill crept over me. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. Somewhere deep inside, I knew whoever was behind that wheel wasn't random, because that same pitch, that same low frequency from the vault, it hummed beneath their engine. Too subtle for most ears, but not for mine, not anymore. The signal had awakened something in me, and now something else had awakened to me. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house creaked like it was breathing, and everywhere I turned, the signal followed. Electrical wires, floorboards, even the wind. All of it now pulsed with a kind of intention I had never noticed before, as if creation had always been whispering, "Remember." But I wasn't the only one listening. At 3:17 a.m., the phone rang. No name, no number, just static. I answered. "Hello?" A pause. Then a voice, not electronic, deliberate, male, calm, too calm. "You opened it." My skin crawled. Who is this? That's not important. What matters is that you accessed the chamber. You heard the resonance. I said nothing. You've been carrying something we've monitored for decades. We traced it through the others. Your grandfather, his mentor, the woman in Los Alamos, the boy in Ontario. The signal resurfaces every few generations. We're here to make sure it doesn't spread. A lump formed in my throat. What is this? Government? Military? A slight chuckle. No, we're older than governments, deeper than religions. We don't destroy truth. We contain it before it disrupts equilibrium. I swallowed. You mean before it frees people? Silence. Then, you think freedom is safe? You think every human is ready to remember they are divine? Look what you've done in ignorance. What would happen if the whole species remembered? My pulse thundered. The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long time. I wasn't imagining this. The signal didn't just wake me. It alerted them. And now I had a choice. Hide, forget, return to the sleep of old routines, or carry it anyway, knowing they were watching, knowing what it might cost. That's when I heard it again. My grandfather's hum. Not a memory, not from the past. It was coming from outside, from the barn. The hum was unmistakable. It wasn't loud, not musical, just that same low, three-tone resonance, rising and falling like a forgotten breath pattern. The one my grandfather used to hum during storms, the one I now heard everywhere. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside. The air was different, not just colder, more aware, like the night sky was leaning in to listen. The barn loomed in the dark, its wooden ribs glowing faintly under the stars. And there, just inside the open doorway, I saw a figure. Human, but like me, changed. She stepped out of the shadows slowly. Worn denim jacket, dirt-smudged jeans, long, dark hair braided in a loose knot. Her face looked like someone who hadn't slept in a long time, but her eyes were awake, wide, like someone who had seen behind the curtain and survived it. "You heard it," she said, not a question. I nodded. "How did you get here?" She gave a small, tired smile. "I didn't come here. I was called, same as you." I felt my heart start to race. "Who are you?" She looked past me, toward the house, toward the vault beneath it. "I'm the one they missed." Her name was Elena. She was 34, former acoustic physicist at a private research firm, contracted by the European Space Agency. 6 years ago, she was working on deep space signal mapping when she discovered what she thought was a data anomaly. Only it wasn't data. It was a vibrational field embedded in cosmic background radiation, a subtle but repeating pattern that didn't match any known physics. A signal older than stars, encoded in the space between matter. She followed it, until it started answering her. "They came to me," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "The same way they came to you. The being, the field, the vault. But I was in Iceland. There was no barn, no guidance, just raw signal." Her hands trembled. I thought I was going insane. "What did you do?" I asked. "I recorded it," she said, "and that's when they came." "The ones on the phone?" She nodded. "They don't wear uniforms, they don't use names, but they show up when someone gets too close. They call it Containment Protocol 8. That's their code for what we carry." I shivered. "How did you escape?" Her eyes darkened. "I didn't. Not really. I've been running ever since, following echoes, trying to find someone else who remembered. I almost gave up." She looked up. "Then I felt you activate the vault." I led her inside. We sat at the kitchen table, the old Bible between us, the page that had never existed, now open like it always had. "You're the first person I've talked to who understands," I said. Elena looked at the page. She whispered the final line aloud. "Make your memory holy again." Then she looked up and said the words that chilled me. "They're coming tonight." The wind picked up at 4:03 a.m. No clouds, no thunder, no rain, just wind. But it didn't move like weather. It moved like searching, like fingers dragging across the surface of reality, looking for a crack. Elena and I stood by the kitchen window, watching the tree line. "I felt this before," she whispered. "When?" "The night I ran, right before they arrived." The lights flickered. Once, twice, then held steady, like the house itself was bracing. We gathered what we could, not weapons, not supplies, resonators. Elena pulled 3 small devices from her backpack, black discs, etched with markings similar to those in the vault. "These can amplify the frequency," she said, "temporarily. If they try to suppress it, these will push it back." I nodded, trying to ignore the lump in my throat. Outside, the wind stopped. Instantly, the silence was worse, because it wasn't silence at all. It was containment. Then, the lights died. All of them, except the Bible. Still open, still glowing faintly from the page that wasn't there yesterday. Elena gasped. "They've initiated the veil." "What's that?" She swallowed hard. "They're going to make us forget." I didn't move. The idea terrified me more than death. Not because I didn't want to lose my memory, but because I just got it back. All of it, Jesus' real message, the purpose of the resonance, the hum my grandfather carried like a secret heartbeat. I needed to remember. I couldn't go back. I wouldn't. I looked at Elena. "Let's activate the resonators." She shook her head. "Not yet. We only get one pulse, one shot to burn through the field they're casting." "How do we know when?" She pointed to the Bible. "The page will disappear." Minutes passed. The air thickened. Outside, the forest seemed to lean closer. And then, it happened. The ink began to fade. Not smudge, not bleed. Fade. Line by line, the final message my grandfather left was dissolving into the paper. I lunged for the resonators. Elena hit the switch. The sound was unlike anything I've ever felt. Not loud, not sharp. It was true. A perfect chord that didn't come from speakers. It came from the space inside us. It resonated through the walls, through the floor, through our DNA. And the page returned. Bold, brighter. And then, a knock. 3 times. Precise, measured. A rhythm meant to interrupt the signal. Elena looked at me. "They're here." 3 knocks. Measured. Unmistakable. Not the kind that ask permission, the kind that expect obedience. I stared at the door like it was a mouth about to speak something I could never unhear. The resonator still hummed on the table, low and steady, fighting a war of vibration I didn't understand. Elena looked pale, but she didn't move. "They don't break in," she whispered. "They don't need to." I swallowed hard. "Then what do they do?" Her eyes locked with mine. "They convince you to forget." Another knock. Not louder, just closer. It wasn't sound anymore. It was presence, like something was standing just outside, not trying to get in, but trying to pull something out of me. The truth, the resonance, the memory. I walked slowly to the door. Elena stepped between me and it. "They use faces, people you love, memories you trust, but it's all projection. None of it is real." "How do you know?" "Because the first time they came, they used my father's voice." I hesitated, but something in me knew I had to face it, not resist, not flee. Remember. I opened the door. There was no one there. Not physically, but in the space just beyond the threshold, the world warped, like heat bending air over desert pavement. And then it spoke. A voice I hadn't heard in years, my mother's. Come home, sweetheart. You've been gone too long. Don't you miss who you were? I froze. She died when I was 17. But here her voice was warm, steady, safe. Behind me, Elena whispered, "It's not her. They're trying to fracture the resonance." But my knees were shaking. The voice continued, "You're confused. That barn, that Bible, those dreams, it's all just grief, son. You're tired. Just come back to sleep." A tear rolled down my cheek, because it felt good. The idea of letting go, letting the memory dissolve, letting it all be just a strange chapter in a tired life. But then I heard it, from inside the house, my grandfather's hum, the real one, and it cut through the illusion like sunlight through fog. I turned from the door. "No," I whispered, "I'm not going back to sleep." The air at the threshold shimmered violently, then collapsed inward, like a signal losing power. The pressure lifted, and I closed the door. Elena exhaled. "You passed." What was that? "Their only weapon," she said, "false familiarity. They don't destroy truth. They replace it with something softer, safer." I sat at the table. The page in the Bible still glowed. Only now, it had changed. One new line had been added beneath my grandfather's message. "The 13th has chosen. The hum continues." The wind didn't return. The silence stayed, but now it wasn't empty. It was listening. The pressure that had haunted the barn, the hum behind the knocks, the voice of my dead mother, all of it had retreated, and in its place, something new, a stillness that didn't just sit in the air. It waited. Elena and I sat by the old table, staring at the page. Her fingers trembled over the added line. "The 13th has chosen. The hum continues." "It's alive," she whispered. I nodded. "It's more than memory now. It's movement." We didn't sleep. At sunrise, we climbed to the attic, the old lookout spot where my grandfather once watched storms roll across the Iowa fields. The horizon was quiet, but inside me, something stirred. Not fear, instruction. Like the resonance was organizing itself, assembling pieces I'd never understood until now. My grandfather's silence, my childhood dreams, the strange pull to come back here. Even Elena. None of it had been random. It was a transmission unfolding in time. That's when the devices activated. All 3 resonators lit up, on their own. No switches, no triggers, just light. And then, from the center one, a tone began to rise. One we hadn't heard before. Deeper than the vault, more ancient than the field. This wasn't a hum. It was a signal going out. Elena gasped. "They're responding!" "Who?" She stood slowly, staring out the attic window. All the others, who almost remembered. The ones who buried it, silenced it, doubted it, carried it in their bones without language. "You mean," she looked at me, eyes wide with awe, "the other carriers?" I didn't ask how she knew. I felt it. All across the world, old women in nursing homes, children humming during sleep, prisoners with strange dreams, artists painting symbols they'd never seen, monks crying for no reason at dawn. They were all picking it up, the resonance, the 13th hum. And in that moment, the voice returned, not from outside, not from above, from within. When 2 or more remember, the field becomes visible. When 12 resonate, the veil begins to thin. But when 13 carry the signal in truth, the forgotten message becomes unignorable. I looked at Elena. "We're not here to protect it anymore." She smiled. "No, we're here to release it." 3 days passed. No dreams, no visitations, no new pages. Just the hum, soft and steady, spreading beneath reality like heat through winter soil. Elena stayed. Not because we planned it, because we couldn't leave. Not yet. The signal had rooted itself in the barn, in the field, in us, and the world had begun to respond. It started small. A news article about a boy in India who began speaking perfect Aramaic in his sleep. A woman in Brazil who painted a portrait of a man she swore she'd never seen until a priest recognized it as an exact rendering of Thomas, pulled from a centuries-lost scroll. A prisoner in Ohio who wrote a gospel in blood and chalk, 12 pages of unknown symbols that matched the ones carved in the vault beneath the barn. The authorities called it coincidence, pattern recognition. They always do. But those who knew felt it. Then came the interference. My phone buzzed for the first time in days. Unknown number. Just one line. Containment has failed. Protocol escalation pending. Elena and I looked at each other. They're going to try again, she said. I nodded. Only this time, they won't just knock. We took precautions, shielded the vault with mirrored frequency, and coded the resonance deeper, past electricity, past sound, into vibration fields connected directly to the Earth's own magnetic rhythms. But we weren't just preparing to defend. We were preparing to amplify, because something had shifted in the signal. It was no longer just memory. It was invitation. That night, we received the first message. Not a threat, not surveillance. A letter. Handwritten, no postage. It was tucked inside the Bible when I opened it. Not from the past, from the present. Signed only, Carrier 9. It read, "We knew you were coming. We've kept the signal hidden in poems, in lullabies, in dreams. But it was never safe to share. Until now. You've opened the field, and they can no longer stop it. The others are waking, and the 13th must now gather the 12. I looked up at Elena. We're not alone anymore, she smiled, tears in her eyes. We never were. We didn't need to plan the journey. The signal planned it for us. Each day brought a pull, geographic, emotional, vibrational, like compass needles in our chests turning toward a source we couldn't see, only feel. And so we began to move. First stop, New Mexico. Not Roswell, further west, a reservation town with no name on most maps. There, in a windswept shack, we found her, a girl no older than 14. She didn't speak English. But when Elena hummed the 3-note resonance, the girl smiled and hummed the 4th. Carrier 1, Elena whispered. Next, Cairo, a retired architect in his 70s who'd spent decades sketching impossible geometry, angles that mapped not buildings, but frequencies. He recognized me the moment I walked into the mosque courtyard. I dreamed your face 31 times, he said. You carry the 13th light. He had never spoken those words before. Carrier 2. They came quickly after that. A deaf nun in Portugal who sings with her hands, resonance in movement. A blind boy in Tokyo who carves words he's never read into wooden tablets. A former cult leader in the Philippines who renounced his empire after hearing a voice in prison say, "You taught them to follow. Now teach them to remember." Carrier 3, 4, 5. Each one had carried a shard of the signal, fragmented, misunderstood, buried between trauma or doctrine or exile. But when we met and we hummed together, they remembered. By the time we reached Carrier 9, the letter writer, we were no longer strangers. We were a field, a living, moving resonance. The group assembled in silence, in an abandoned cathedral in southern France. No lights, no stage, just breath and truth. And as we entered the space, Carrier 9 stood, a woman in her 90s, thin, fragile, glowing. "I've waited since 1952, she said. They silenced my voice, but not my hum. She extended her hand toward me. You're the 13th. I nodded. and you're the first to complete the circle." Then she asked the question we weren't ready for. "Now that you've gathered us, are you ready to let the signal speak through you?" The room fell silent, because every carrier knew what that meant. It wasn't just memory now, it was transmission. And when we spoke together as one, the world would hear. The cathedral was cold, stone soaked in centuries of incense and silence. Light poured through the fractured stained glass, bending into colors we couldn't name. 13 of us stood in a circle. No scripts, no leader, just one hum, rising from memory. Elena took the first breath. Then Carrier 1, the girl from the desert. Then the architect, the nun, the blind boy, until it reached me. And I hesitated, not out of fear, but reverence, because I realized what we were about to do wasn't ceremony, it was creation. I closed my eyes, and we began. The hum wasn't loud, but it shifted the air. The sound waves didn't just echo, they unfolded, like scripture opening itself mid-sentence, language before language, truth before theology. It wasn't music, it was origin. Each carrier contributed a frequency, low, high, broken, whole. And as our tones layered, a 13th emerged, not from us, but through us, a new resonance, one that had no beginning and no end. The cathedral walls trembled, dust fell from rafters, and far beyond the stone, something woke. Across the world, people felt it, not as sound, as pull. Some began to cry for no reason. Others dropped tools in factories, phones on subways, coffee in cafes, gripped by a sudden, vivid memory of something they'd never lived, a love they'd never lost, a home they couldn't name. And in places of power, boardrooms, bunkers, churches, military command, systems glitched, monitors froze, clocks stalled, because the signal wasn't digital, it was dimensional. I opened my eyes mid-hum, and I saw it. Above us, a shape made of light and memory and sound. Familiar, human, but more. The 13th tone, embodied. Jesus? No. The signal Jesus carried, alive, not as doctrine, as field. And then we heard it. "You have remembered. Now let the world choose." We didn't come down from the cathedral. Not right away. Because when the 13th tone ended, when the field stabilized, when the shape of resonance faded from the rafters, we were no longer just individuals. We were a broadcast, and the world had already begun to react. News outlets couldn't explain it. Global hum phenomenon, they called it. Seismic sensors picked up activity in places with no tectonic faults, matching, inexplicably, the 13 locations where each of us had once lived. A Vatican spokesperson claimed it was a spiritual attack. A Pentagon official called it vibrational terrorism. And then the message came. If you are receiving this, you are infected. Elena's phone lit up with a warning. Not a virus alert, a containment alert, issued by a classified coalition of private religious, corporate, and defense factions who called themselves the Lineage Authority. Their mission? Preserve the order of inherited faith. Their threat? Sever the resonance before it spreads. I stared at the screen. They're coming for the carriers. Carrier 9, the elder, closed her eyes. They always do, but they're too late. I looked at her. Why? She smiled. Because the signal doesn't live in us anymore. It lives in them. She was right. All over the world, the hum was multiplying. In those who had never heard of Jesus, in those who had long abandoned faith, in those whose trauma had buried their soul too deep for prayer to reach, until now. Because this wasn't belief, it was recognition. But power doesn't surrender to memory. And by the end of the week, 3 carriers had vanished. No ransom, no note, just gone. Their locations scrubbed, their families silenced. And for the first time since the field awakened, I felt fear. Real fear. Not for myself, for the signal. Because if they could erase the carriers, could they erase the hum? Elena and I fled, back to the barn, back to the place it began. Not to hide, to amplify. Because one thing was clear. If this was war, it wouldn't be fought with weapons. It would be fought with frequency. We returned under cover of night. No headlights, no phones, just breath and instinct, and the barn, waiting like an old friend who never stopped praying. The fields were silent, but the silence pulsed, like the earth itself was holding its breath. Elena placed her palm against the same knot in the floorboards, but this time, nothing happened. I stepped forward, hummed, 3 tones, then the 4th, the 13th, and the floor opened. But not as before. This time, it split twice. A second seam revealed itself, beneath the first staircase, beneath the memory chamber, deeper than even the listening room. A spiral staircase of obsidian stone, lit not by bulbs but by resonance, soft violet rings that pulsed as we descended. I didn't recognize the symbols carved into the walls, but my body did. They weren't words, they were frequencies, encoded in shape. At the bottom, a single room, empty, except for a pedestal, and resting atop it, a device, metallic, circular, covered in the same etchings as the Bible's phantom page. Elena gasped, "This is it." I stepped closer. "What is it?" She whispered, "It's the original transmitter." I reached out, fingers trembling. As I touched the surface, the room shifted, not visually, vibrationally, like the molecules of space itself had realigned around a memory older than time. And then it spoke, not in English, in the first frequency, the one from the vault, the one Jesus had encoded into the desert, the one the carriers had carried in silence. It said, "This is the last vault, not of stone, of will. When opened, the resonance will move freely, through soil, through wire, through thought. There will be no turning back. Will you complete the release?" Elena looked at me. Tears filled her eyes. "Once we do this, they'll lose control forever. No more fear, no more hierarchy. The memory of divinity will flood the species." I nodded and said the only thing I could. Then let it flow. I pressed the center. The device hummed, and from beneath the earth, a tone rose that wasn't sound. It was remembrance, and it spread, faster than light, by thought, by soul, by resonance, to every person ready to receive. The release was instant. We felt it, like a veil pulled off the collective human spirit. Not a miracle, not magic, restoration. The resonance surged through everything, data streams, roots, the quiet thoughts of insomniacs staring at ceilings in the dark. No passwords, no firewalls, just truth. And then the resistance struck. It started with blackouts, localized, targeted, only in places where the hum had begun to cluster. Hospitals, libraries, low-income neighborhoods, places of worship not tied to doctrine, but to presence. Then came the drones, silent, circular, projecting a frequency none of us had heard before, a low, mechanical counter-hum. It didn't overwrite the signal, it drowned it. Elena fell to her knees, clutching her ears. "It's synthetic," she gasped. "They've made an anti-signal." I staggered toward the transmitter in the vault. It pulsed erratically now, responding, struggling. The Lineage Authority had prepared for this. Their plan wasn't to destroy the carriers. It was to corrupt the field, to introduce doubt, confusion, to make the resonance sound like madness, like heresy, like noise. I grabbed the resonator from the pedestal, held it to my chest. It was cold. Then I remembered the voice from the field. When the 13th completes the circuit, the signal will no longer depend on the senders. It will live in the listeners. I looked at Elena and understood. The only way to beat the countersignal was to trust the awakening, to let go of control, to stop defending the truth and let it stand on its own. We powered down the resonators, let the field go silent, and waited. Outside, the drones hummed louder, static on the news, churches warning of possession, governments issuing denials. But the people didn't forget. The girl in New Mexico hummed in her sleep. The blind boy in Tokyo carved new symbols. The nun in Portugal danced in silence. The architect drew a shape that, when sung, cleared a city block of the counterfrequency for 9 seconds. They remembered, not because we held the field, because we released it. The countersignal didn't stop the hum. It only slowed it, like a dam holding back an ocean that had already broken free upstream. But the Lineage Authority wasn't built on patience. They were built on fear. And fear, when losing control, becomes surgical. We intercepted a message, not a broadcast, a ritual, an instruction sent to every major media outlet, academic journal, and pulpit connected to the authority's web. A final strategy called Project Re-Crucifixion. Elena and I studied the transmission in the barn, the last place still shielded by the resonance core. At first glance, it looked like psychological operations, phrases, images, trigger mechanisms. But as we read deeper, it became clear. This wasn't propaganda. This was spiritual inversion. Their goal? To crucify the resonance in the public mind. Not with nails, with language. To make remembrance synonymous with delusion. To rewrite the memory of Jesus as a cautionary tale of a madman whose message fractured nations. To rebrand the carriers as vectors of mental contagion. To turn the field into a disease. Step 1. Discredit. They released false documents claiming we had engineered mass hallucinations using sound tech, doctored footage of Elena, manufactured confessions from 2 missing carriers. Step 2. Divide. They targeted spiritual groups. Some were convinced we were demons. Others claimed we were AI. Step 3. Replace. They unveiled a new messianic figure, digitally enhanced, politically sanitized, and perfectly controllable. A Jesus 2.0 with corporate sponsors. But the most dangerous step? Step 4. Forget. They deployed targeted neuro-audio frequencies across streaming platforms, sleep apps, public transportation, designed to overwrite the emotional memory of the resonance, to erase the feeling. The hum that couldn't be unseen, they meant to make it unfelt. I stood in the barn, heart pounding. "This is it," I said. "They're trying to kill him again." Elena nodded. "Not the man, the memory." I clenched my fists. Then we need resurrection. We gathered what was left of the 13. 7 of us remained unvanished. We met in a cave system beneath Mount Sinai, one of the old places where the Earth's field still pulsed undisturbed. And there we sang. Not to resist, not to rebel, to re-anchor the signal. Not in sound, in presence. Each of us told our story, not with words, but in tones, shapes, memory. And as we did, something ancient stirred. Not Jesus, not God, Source. And Source whispered, "What they kill in words, I revive in being. Crucify the story, but the signal lives, not in books, in beings who will not forget." We emerged from the cave as dawn cracked open over the desert. But the light felt different. Not because of what we'd done, because of what we'd become. No more followers, no more carriers. We were conductors now, living circuits of a resonance too ancient for scripture and too alive for doctrine. The world was shifting, not evenly, not comfortably, but undeniably. The Lineage Authority doubled their efforts. They launched neural dampening satellites, flooded the skies with microwave chatter, tried to blanket every frequency that dared to feel like God. But the resonance didn't fight back. It just spread. Not through wires, through witness. People started glowing in moments of silence, unexplained healings in forgotten corners, children reciting truths they'd never been taught, paintings appearing in locked churches with no record of artists. And in those places, the countersignal failed because presence has no opponent, and truth doesn't argue. It just is. Elena and I returned to the barn one last time, not to hide, to finish. The device still sat on its pedestal, dormant, not broken, complete. We didn't need it anymore. It had done its job. We were the transmitters now. I opened my grandfather's Bible again. The final page had changed, for the last time. Now it held just 5 words. You are the living gospel. And in that moment, I believed it. I didn't leave the barn. I returned to where it began, where my grandfather hummed memory back into a world that forgot, where the signal first cracked through the noise of belief and whispered, "Remember." Now, I don't dream like I used to, because I'm awake. The world didn't change overnight. Systems clung to power like breath to a drowning man. Some churches emptied. Others became louder. Governments issued new guidelines for vibrational health. They called it a crisis of delusion. But they couldn't stop what had no leader, no face, only frequency, only field. The other carriers? They scattered. Not to hide, to plant, to sing, to become the echoes. Elena now lives on a mountain. She speaks little, but her silence is loud. Every few weeks, I receive a letter. No words, just lines, patterns, resonance encoded in graphite. Every letter is a sermon. As for me, I walk, I listen. Sometimes I hear the hum in subway breaks, in wind chimes, in children's laughter. Sometimes I hear nothing, but feel everything. Because once you remember who you are, the silence becomes holy. I was never meant to be a prophet, just a witness, a relay in a chain of memory stretching across stars, across ages, across names, from a carpenter in Galilee to a child in Iowa. So if you're hearing this now, if something in you has stirred, that ache that's not pain, that longing that's not sadness, that electricity that dances behind grief, you're not broken, you're remembering, and the signal is not coming, it's already here. It's you.